Thanks very much. I think everybody should just give a brief introduction of themselves. My name is Tim. I'm a co-founder of IronWeave, which is a privacy protocol that protects data by putting individual units of data in independently encrypted blocks. And we do this by using blockchain technology just in a way which no one's thought of before. So,
hello, my name is Agata, and I'm a Chief Legal Officer within the Institute of Free Technology. One of our projects is Logos, which is decentralized privacy-preserving tech stack that comprises of blockchain, messaging, and storage, all vertically integrated, with privacy-preserving as its goal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christy. I'm the head of engineering at Aleo Network Foundation. Aleo is a L1, privacy L1, built from the ground up with privacy principles in mind. Happy to talk more offline and later on at this panel as well.
Hey, I'm Jacek. I'm a director at Sky Frontier Foundation, and also I co-founded L2Bit and StableWatch.
Hey, I'm Danny Ryan. I'm a co-founder of Etherialize. We work on onboarding institutional capital flows and markets, and privacy is kind of a baseline requirement for moving these markets on chain.
all right, so we're the first panel of the day, so we're going to keep it relatively high level and dip down a little into the technical weeds, but mainly high level. So we want to talk about what privacy is, why it's important, what technologies exist today that can enable it, and to what extent they're actually delivering versus the promise. So to kick things off, Agata, can you tell us how you view privacy and its importance, especially in the context of our industry?
So I'm a lawyer, but I spent the last few days and actually my day-to-day even surrounded by cryptographers, mathematicians, engineers, but also other lawyers, but also activists, cypherpunks, a very broad community, thought leaders, educators. And there's one thing that is undeniable. Privacy is not one conversation, it's many things, and it has many dimensions. It has a legal dimension, tech dimension, civic dimension, social dimension, and for many emotional dimension as well, and ethical. So there is no one answer to this because it depends on that dimension. It's certainly very important. It's what everyone seems to be talking about, especially at this event. But I think what is also important when we discuss privacy is set the context and give the framing and explain the dimension that we are talking about to ensure that we don't collapse all these dimensions into one usually regulatory anxiety conversation, but understand that privacy can mean many things. It can be resilience for the network, it can be structural boundary, it can be a tool for neutrality, it can be really, really many things, and it's important to make that clear before we enter discourse and debate and broaden that, that narrative of privacy.
Thank you for setting the table there. So Danny, can you delve deeper into what privacy means in the context of blockchain technology and Ethereum specifically? What is it, what isn't?
Right. I mean, privacy is simply, most of the world relies upon privacy. And in the blockchain world, we have these open systems, these entirely verifiable systems, these very beautiful and exciting systems. But if you actually look at how markets work, how people assume their life savings work, how some credit instrument is traded amongst banks, you just don't have everything in the clear. And so fundamentally, we have to architect, if we're going to onboard the world, which I think that's been the intention since the beginning, but it really feels like we've hit this transition point in this year where the world wants to be onboarded. Regulators are interested, things are moving in that direction, and the technology is actually ready to do so, that if we're actually going to bring the hundreds of trillions of capital that the world has on chain and actually begin to not only change the crypto native, but change the world, we have to have reasonable privacy infrastructure, reasonable privacy, regulatory, reasonable, it just has to be a fundamental tool that we're architecting and utilizing at this point.
Mm-hmm. And Jacek, so you've had a front row seat in the stablecoin industry basically since the beginning. So you're at Maker, now StableWatch, L2Beat. So through all your conversations and all the projects that you're monitoring, how important is privacy, and how do they perceive the different projects, the issuers, the processors that use stablecoins? How important is it for them to be able to realize their ambitions to replumb the world's financial system using these tools?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And if you ask me this question maybe a few months ago, I would say that there is like nothing in the intersect between those two. But now, here we are at the Privacy and Compliance Summit, which is just like next to Stable Summit, which is like literally next door, organized by the same people. So I think that this is very telling. At StableWatch, we chatted with like a bunch of stablecoin issuers, many stablecoin users, and privacy has never been like top of their mind. But this is kind of changing now in the increasingly competitive environment that the stablecoins face. They are just trying to, make some difference, like give users something that like some other stablecoins don't do. And there may be even some kind of like an announcement coming even during this panel about this. So yeah, I expect many stablecoins to kind of like take it just more seriously, so that they will not compete just based on yield or just like some ease of payments, but some other things like maybe privacy. And then the other thing is that it's just I don't think that like stablecoin issuers and like anyone working in this field should expect that they would be that you would have like completely like stablecoin just free of like any regulatory requirements. Like right now you have such an unlevel playing field with bank accounts with like extensive KYC, with banks not being able to like conduct business because of so strong AML requirements. And then you have like stablecoin issuers who can like issue to whoever they want, or at the very least anyone can use their products. It's just not sustainable. It just creates this like regulatory arbitrage opportunities that will not last forever. So yeah, in short, not much connection right now, but I expect this to change massively over the next months and years.
And to what extent are the stablecoin issuers identifying opportunities for their stablecoins to be used, which they won't be able to tap without privacy? Do you hear a lot of that? So I deal a lot with the stablecoin issuers because we're going to enable private transactions using their stablecoins. And up until maybe a month or two ago, they would say, Tim, we 100% understand the value of this, and we're going to need this. The time is now. Our customers are not asking for it now. So what are you seeing from the stablecoin issuers now with respect to them talking about opportunities that will be unlocked through privacy, if at all? Maybe it's just lip service now.
Yeah, not much, honestly, right? I mean, I think that they're like primarily like yield stablecoins, which are trying to survive in the current market environment, not collapse. And some of them already collapsed in the past weeks. And then you have like large payment stablecoins and like, some upcoming players that are just, I guess that like, financial and like economic considerations are like top of their mind, like in terms of like how to maintain reserves, how to like earn yield. And, with the like compressing yields, it just becoming more and more tricky. But this is why they will look into user data, for example, to try to extract more value out of their customers. This is just inevitable. Mm-hmm. And some others will use privacy to their advantage, like trying to present their stablecoins not just like as easy payments, but just like tool to maintain privacy for their users. So yeah, again, I'm not seeing too much data coming from them about right now, but I think that we already see some like market movements or just the market trends that move into the direction of privacy becoming more relevant in the stablecoin world.
Okay. Now, Christy, you're with Aleo, and you leverage zero-knowledge proofs as your part of your special sauce. So can you talk about how ZK is perceived in the industry as a silver bullet? It's often whenever I talk about what we're doing, they say, oh, we're using ZK, and people don't even have a concept of what that means. They think a ZK rollup might confer privacy to all the transactions that are happening on it. There's a lot of fuzziness there. So if you can clarify, what is it that a ZK proof can do independently and with respect to protecting data?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what ZK is. So zero knowledge proofs as a technology simply means that you're able to prove something without revealing the underlying data. And it's very use case dependent. I think ZK gets thrown around a lot. but it actually doesn't necessarily mean privacy. In the context of, for instance, you hear a lot about ZK rollups, but in that particular context, all the transactions are still very much public. You're not hiding the transactions. By doing ZK rollups, you're simply proving the state transitions. But in the context of other use cases, for example, a lot of things that you can build on Aleo, which is a privacy L1. And we have a very different computation model where you run your computation locally on your machine, and then you generate a proof of that computation. And then you verify that proof on Aleo, because you can do the verification of proofs, fairly quickly on chain. And so essentially what that happens is that whatever computation you're doing locally, you're hiding what's running on your local machine, and then you're only verifying the proofs. So this all sounds very complicated. I'll give you a very simple example. So Aleo is enabled by the smart contract and the ZK VM, which is not a EVM compatible. And then, so on the ZK VM, you have the off-chain portion and on-chain portion. So it's a smart contract called Leo, which is our programming language. It's different from Ethereum, but it's still a smart contract. You essentially define your application logic, and then the proofs gets verified on chain. And so in the case of a very simple private transfer, we're talking about sending and receiving some tokens. And on Aleo, that can be completely private, including the sender and the receiver. And that's just an example. And going back to the stablecoin conversation, we're actually launching our first ever, we're actually not just our first ever, in general, the first private and compliant stablecoin on Aleo. And the only reason we're able to achieve that compliance is not only by talking to a lot of regulators and policymakers, but also all of the logic, for instance, the AML requirements and all the other requirements that's asked by the stablecoin issuers. All of those logic was only made possible because of a smart contract. You can essentially build in whatever logic, right? Code is law. And so that is only possible through programmable privacy. And I think that's really where Aleo shines.
Okay. Now, privacy means different things to different people. And there are different elements of data that are protected and aren't protected by some of the tools that we use in the space today, FHE, TEE, ZK, and what have you. And I'm going to use some baked goods here, a local empanada to illustrate something. So here, we're not exactly sure what's in here, but you can feel the texture. You can smell it. You can find out where it was purchased. And there's a lot that you could deduce just by looking at it, but you don't know what's inside. Now, the blockchain data that we all traffic in is very similar. So you could have something that's encrypted in a block, in a payload, but then there's all sorts of information around that which can be leaked. And that could be the RPC that was pinged. It could be the time of the transaction. It could be the interacting parties. It could be the speed. It could be all sorts of things. And from this data, you could deduce a lot of information that could be used against people. And a few days ago, there was the Web3 Privacy Summit. And Roger, the founder of Tor, he put a very impactful slide on the board. It was from Michael Hayden, the former director of the NSA. And he said, we kill people based on metadata. What cell phone towers are their phones pinging? Who are they communicating with? So this data is very powerful, and it's not talked about enough in the blockchain world. So Danny, if you could speak to metadata, and especially with regarding to Ethereum, what is it that is exposed now? And how can we potentially address what's being exposed? Mempool, sequencing, wherever you want to take it.
Yeah, I mean, you exposed an incredible amount of data. Like if you turn your wallet on and you're not running your own node, you're getting balances, you're pinging some remote node that the wallet is running or a provider that they utilize. You're asking for particulars about the balances. Now they've linked your IP with the things that you care about, which are maybe the things that you own, or at least maybe the things that you might interact with, that you then are interacting with. Then you want to send a transaction. Your transaction is going through that same node provider. That node provider has now knows who is originating a transaction, assuming you're not doing it for somebody else. So they have a much more clear idea of who you are. If you run it through your own node, you're probably okay, but you're still broadcasting that. So if the nodes are listening to your node, and timing and in relation to where your transaction originated on the network, they can probably figure out potentially where you are if you don't obfuscate in that in a different way. Then once you're on chain, your address maybe is linked to other addresses that you've been a piece of or a part of, and the web, the tangled web, just continues from there. And it depends on the front ends that you're using, but you're leaking data everywhere. I mean, my phone, even crypto aside, like it knows everything about me, like everything that I'm touching. If you're not using the most like tinfoil hat setup, you are leaking massive amounts of information. And the same goes with blockchain and financial transactions. In the traditional world, you get far better privacy than even like a privacy protocol on a blockchain because of the law, right? Because you're in an agreement with the bank, and the bank is regulated, and the bank has particular laws and what they can leak and what they can't, and that kind of stuff. And you're actually like more protected in that environment. Whereas this open kind of financial environment, even if you were interacting with a privacy pool or something like that, getting in, getting out, the transactions to, the transactions from, all sorts of stuff, like you're entirely unprotected.
So we have these different tools or technologies that people are using to address these issues in one manner, shape, or form. So we have TEE, ZK, FHE, MPC, what we're building. Agata, bring us up to a meta level there. Even though these technologies can be deployed, how can they be deployed in a way where we're actually achieving the desired outcomes to provide the privacy to people that the projects purport to be able to deliver? So the governance that is wrapping these technologies to ensure that they're being used as effectively as they can be.
Well, that's a very difficult question because these technologies are just tools, and they're usually embedded in some sort of product or architecture or structure that is also then governed by the founders or the community. So all of these layers taken into account, and sometimes these technologies are embedded to optimize for certain outcomes, and those outcomes are also relevant when you talk about governance. So taking all this into considerations, then you just need to, analyze that broader context, analyze your restrictions that you are working within. So sometimes these are jurisdictional regulatory restrictions, sometimes these are technical restrictions, usually that ends up with some complex setup of where various considerations overlap, so that you create technology, but you don't negate that technology through some external governance setup, for example. Or you have to slot yourself into regulatory frameworks, but yet try to achieve the outcomes, usually for privacy, within these regulatory frameworks that are not created for decentralized systems. So it's very difficult to combine all of this and achieve everything. Sometimes you need to understand, what are the trade-offs and which are worthwhile and which are not, and how you can structure around those that are very important to you and compromise on some others. So literally not one answer for that. If you really focus on, privacy, and then you have this user privacy element or architectural privacy element. Again, these might be different things that may require different considerations. So literally identify what you're optimizing for, what is important, what is the broader setup you operate within, and how can you navigate all of this and yet achieve your most important goals in an understanding that sometimes you need to trade off some others.
So Jacek, to what extent are you interacting with regulators or hearing from some of the people that you're touching that they're hearing from regulators about what it is that they are seeking for or seeking in privacy and what they're afraid about in privacy? So what are the misunderstandings? What do they get? What don't they get?
That's a cool question. So, you know, if there's one thing to read about like privacy in the internet, it's probably the Cypherpunks Manifesto from 1993 by Eric Hughes, a cypherpunk. And it just presents, you know, this vision of like using cryptography for like achieving real privacy in the digital age. And now when you also read GDPR, right? So like like a kind of like a symbol of like EU red tape regulation, you see the same vision for like, creating a world in which like, you know, privacy and the privacy as a right is protected. And actually, maybe a year ago at a ZK conference, I presented like parts of the Cypherpunks Manifesto and GDPR, and I was asking the question to the audience, where is it coming from? Is it Cypherpunks or the EU? And then there was like total confusion because it was pretty much the same thing. So in terms of the vision, I think that like everyone is aligned. Like who wouldn't like to have privacy? But then the point is that privacy is all about trade-offs because it's not the only value out there that we want to protect, especially as a society. So that's the problem that the regulators are facing. It's not that they don't like privacy. It's just that they have you know, some other things that they have to care about.
And different parts of the government are at odds with each other, right? Like AML is going to have totally different goals than the SEC, which has totally different goals than the Fed. And everyone is, in the US, much more deeply looking at this. And in these conversations, like they're fundamentally at odds.
Yeah, 100%. So this is just trade-offs and lots of complexity. So actually pursuing privacy is about, you know, making proper trade-offs and navigating the complexity. This is where we are talking about this over and over again. Also because we have new technologies that are just like risk for privacy or are just like improving the privacy situation, right? This is what we are doing here right now. It's like we see the potential of like blockchains and like related technologies like ZK to improve privacy, but then we know that blockchains are just like a very adverse environment in terms of privacy right now. So that's what we should expect, that those things are just like never over, that there's like no end state. And this is what I think, you know, this is just how we should approach regulators in terms of like discussing with them, trying to like improve based on like what we know and the technologies that we have right now. There is no fundamental misconception in terms of like, you know, so that they don't want to pursue privacy. Maybe, you know, with the exception of like NSA, this type of folks, right? But as Danny said, this is just like part of the government, maybe not the largest one.
We're also in a funny position where we had deeper financial privacy before the internet. But now parts of the federal government across the globe, that they're used to being able to see anything that, you know, go through back doors, be able to see digital flows. And so actually trying to reclaim the privacy of 1993, pre kind of the wave of the adoption of the internet, it's tough because you're trying to claw back something. You're trying to claw back some semblance of financial privacy and some sanity on the internet that we've lost, I think.
But I think Jacek is right. Sorry, if I may refer to that synergy that you mentioned. A lot of the regulatory frameworks were created at the time for the technologies that were available at the time and for frameworks that were known at the time. And our role should be to explain that we can achieve those outcomes with different technology in even a better way. And GDPR is a great example. So it's a regulatory framework that is based on certain values that we align with, but the actual framework and regulatory solution is adapted to the technology that is available and the data hoarding model that was the only model available. Now we can roll it back and explain how we can achieve the same outcome in a much better way through the tools and technologies that are available today. So appealing to that synergy of values and synergy of the outcomes we wanted to achieve in the first place, but now we actually have better technologies for that and better decentralized systems rather than centralized. That might be a conversation that is constructive.
So we're having some of these conversations now with law enforcement and some intelligence agencies. So our infrastructure, it uses blockchain technology just in a novel way. There is no global state, there's no central ledger. We basically have a fabric of blockchains that interweave to protect data, where every address is its own ledger, and whenever two or more addresses interact, a new block is created that then encrypts the data that's in those blocks. And then those encryption keys are only shared with the participants, and then the block is placed on those participant ledgers. So this new architecture, it's permissionless, but it's privacy preserving. So now these agencies are trying to get their heads around, how do we deal with this? This is something that we would like to protect our own communications. Speaking with someone at the DOJ, and they have colleagues around the world that they need to communicate with, and they want this to protect their communications. But they're also afraid that they won't be able to do their job if other people are using these tools. So it's a balancing act. How do we release this in a prudent way that can serve everybody? I don't know about equally, but we have to make a value judgment. To what extent do we want this tool to be ubiquitous versus in the hands of the few? Because there could be unintended consequences birthing this type of technology into the world.
I think we could keep building, recalibrating the framework, the networks, keep building the architectures that recalibrate this power dynamic and recalibrate this, bring back boundaries into the architecture that optimize for privacy and for the values, and keep explaining at the same time that how this aligns with the values, with the rule of law, and with the fundamental rights that should be embedded in the infrastructure. Because a lot of the distortion and regulatory abuse happened because it was also like regulatory overreach, and certain abuse happened because it was possible, because the digital infrastructure, traditional one, allows for data hoarding. That's the only tool that is perhaps available. And then with that comes pressure and exposure and eventually regulatory overreach. So if we rebalance the architecture, then hopefully the regulatory approach will also kind of rebalance with it, with time.
So we've talked about some different technologies here, and I'd like to, because I didn't have my breakfast, I'm going to bring back the empanada here. So there are a few different technologies that we can use that can protect privacy. So we've talked about zero knowledge proofs. So is there beef in here or not? It can answer that. You can have FHE. FHE would be like having a blind chef that's able to mix up the ingredients, but they don't actually know what's in there. It's kind of a magic way of computing unencrypted data. You have NPCs. And that could be like having 4 different chefs that have all done a part of the recipe, but not the collective recipe together. So they're not exactly sure how it all came together. TEEs, you can have the data protected in this empanada, but then the operators, the people that created the chips, they have a window to see what's inside. And then there's our infrastructure, which I discussed before. So these are all different approaches to preserving privacy in some way. So what I'd like to talk about is the extent to which everybody here is seeing the rubber meeting the road with these technologies, and to what extent they could hold the key to bringing privacy to the industry and allowing for enterprises and governments and others to start using this technology beyond the people that were native to the industry. So maybe, Danny, you're close to how Ethereum is meeting the road with enterprises. So what are you seeing in terms of the technologies that can help deliver the privacy that will allow these enterprises to play in this space?
Right. The more and more conversations we have about privacy and the needs of various markets, institutional markets, it's clear, at least through an institutional lens, counterparty risk is huge. Who can screw me over? Who can mess up my transaction? What am I trusting? And when you think of MPC, there's kind of an assumption they have to take. If you think of TE, there's also generally an assumption of who's operating. Are they close to the hardware? Is there going to be a hack in the hardware? The mathematical solutions, such as ZK, and hopefully eventually things like FHE, they speak to them. And we're at this juncture of we're at this inflection point of we've poured billions of dollars into applied cryptography, and we do have mathematically pure solutions that are on the verge of being secure enough, efficient enough, and what math and pure cryptographic solutions represent to them is the elimination of counterparty risk on that component of the infrastructure. And so it's much easier to sell institutions on ZK and other math-based privacy solutions.
Is that your experience, Christy? So when you're talking to institutions and they want to know how you're leveraging ZK, what is it that they perceive, and how is it that you've seen that ZK and Aleo solution can help meet those needs?
Yeah, so I think in our case, we're at the Privacy and Compliance Summit, and we actually have done a lot of work talking to regulators and policymakers about the approaches such that we can satisfy their requirements. And I think in the case of, we're talking about ZK versus Ts versus FHEs, I think there is no one size fits all. They all have different risk assumptions. And then I think it's going to be highly use case dependent. And then in the case of compliance, there is also no, a checklist of things where you tick off and you say you're compliant. It's going to depend on a lot of things, including not only just what the regulators require, what they're comfortable with, but also, from the issuer's perspective, what risk level are they comfortable with taking? Because ultimately they are the issuers and responsible for the stablecoins issued. So I think it's an open conversation between all the parties, all the stakeholders, and for the case of the private stablecoin we're launching called USAD, it's the first completely private, meaning sender receiver address, but at the same time compliant. And we were only able to achieve that because, through these open conversations with the issuers, with the policymakers. And we think that in this landscape where there's, so many issuers and so many stablecoins we're seeing, and we are seeing that actually issuers are very eager for this new feature because it unlocks a complete different use case. I think the most prominent ones, including like payroll solutions. Obviously, people don't want to see how much they're getting paid, but also we're seeing use cases in donations for, for instance, religious institutions or people in high-risk countries. We're also seeing use cases in treasury management, where, where in institution use cases where the counterparty risk is really high. And so far, there's a huge market that hasn't been unlocked because we didn't have privacy. And we think that the private stablecoin is going to change everything. Because right now, that's like 0% of the stablecoin market. I think that's going to change really fast.
I think you're probably right. So, Jacek, what technologies have you seen either being evaluated at Maker or being used by other stablecoin issuers or platforms that are facilitating the exchange of stablecoins that you believe have promise out of the list that I mentioned, or maybe some that I didn't address?
I think that's a tough one because we've seen this promise of this type of technologies for such a long time. I remember discussing using ZK for facilitating KYC in terms of sharing exactly the information you want to share that's relevant maybe 9 years ago. And there are still no such, there are so many products that claim they make it possible in the market, but none of them is has any prevalent use. It's when you take simple problem, paying some anon contributors, right? Some hackers that you really want to hire because they, for, I don't know, security research or whatever. It's so difficult to do that, if you want to do this in a completely compliant way and make sure that you're not transacting with anyone who's conducted illicit activity or anything like that. This is just super, super difficult. And this is just the simplest use case out there. So yeah, I still think that we are at the stage that, or maybe another example, right? After Tornado Cash, right? I mean, still for many users, the way to transact privately or improve their privacy on the blockchains is to send money to a centralized exchange and send it to some other address, right? So there's the chain of transaction on chain is just broken, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, come on, you're sending just to some like KYC actor, it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I would love to give you like some good examples of like real use cases, but I still think that we are at the stage that we hope that there are gonna be examples like that in the future.
Are there any catalysts that you see that could springboard the industry into more, let's say, adoption with respect to private transactions? At Maker, you're probably talking to people about the adoption of DAI and how you can get more people to use it. Are there any conversations that you're having now with groups that could be that catalyst? They're big enough for the needle to really move.
Not really, honestly.
Okay.
It's like, yeah, I think that maybe Dan is like better suited to answer this question in terms of like what like institutions.
Privacy is table stakes. Like, we're looking at $1 trillion plus markets, and we're trying to figure out how to remap and re-architect their flows on blockchains to bring efficiencies, to bring them in the 21st century, to get the massive network effects. And if you're going to actually onboard these markets, privacy is not some killer feature. Privacy is like at a minimum, you have to have the same private flows as you have in the market that hasn't been upgraded for 20 years if you're going to begin to have the conversation. And so for me, like one of the reasons I'm working on this is I think it's a Trojan horse for the industry. I think that's how we're going to actually move forward, or one of the ways that this $120 trillion assets under management by institutions, if they're going to move on chain, which increasingly they are eager to, they're going to demand privacy.
Yeah, but then just one more point. I mean, we should deliver more, right? Like, for example, like the solution like to turn into cash is not like some of the solutions available right now. They just solve for like sanctions compliance, right? So they just like exclude like a set of addresses, or like allow you to verify that some addresses did not interact with the pool. It's not enough. It's not going to bring us to like institutional quality. So I hope that today at all of those panels we're going to discuss like the ways to bring us forward.
Yeah, I actually have an example. I think there are actually tools today that does a pretty good job, but obviously there's room for improvement. So as an example, Aleo is actually on a platform called Request Finance, and that you can use today. They are, I think, one of the biggest. They process like $1 billion in value, and on Request Finance today, you can make a complete private transfers using Aleo to make it's for businesses and also for individuals. So you can pay out to your merchants, vendors, or employees, and you can also not only do private one-to-one transactions, but also private batch transactions where it's for a lot of institutional use cases where they pay out people in batches, and that's something you can use today. And same with the latest Zashi wallet, making it easier to send private transactions. I think we're seeing the industry going very fast, and I'm very optimistic that by the same time next year, we'll see a lot more changes happening.
Wonderful. Well, we have 49 seconds left, so let's make the most of it. 15 seconds each. A phrase about where you think we are in 2030 with respect to privacy.
Architectural, foundational feature, not even feature, part of architecture embedded from the bottom up.
Christy?
I think that we won't have to rely on the goodwill of institutions and governments. We will just take it for granted because it's there.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen at that time, but like by that time, I expect kind of like some total clusterfuck type of situation, like similar to like encryption wars in the 90s, or like Cambridge Analytica in 2016, but in the context of like blockchain privacy.
Good times.
Yeah, and it'll become the default. Like you have that little lock in the top corner of your browser that says you're secure. Like everyone's going to just expect it.
Thanks to all of you. Thanks to the audience and the Privacy Summit and Stable Summit for hosting us. Thanks very much.